Alrighty, let's go ahead and kick off. Welcome everybody to the Checkbox webinar. It's very nice to have everybody here. My name is Min. I am a customer success and delivery lead here at Checkbox, and I'm really excited to introduce you to the webinar, How to Assemble a Legal Tech Stack. And with me, awesome guest. You see him on the left or right there, depending on how your screen's been set up. Alex, welcome to the webinar, Alex.
Thanks, man. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. So today we're tackling the question of how legal teams are forming their legal tech stack. And so, you and I have had some discussion, but would love to share this with the world. And so we thought we might start off by kind of going through what your role is, where you work at, and how that kind of fits in with legal tech.
Yeah, cool, man. No worries. So, yep, Alex is my name. I'm currently a manager at PWC in Australia. What my day entails, that's really hard because every day is literally different. But if I kind of give you some broad themes of what I do, predominantly I look at and advise on technology. So very relevant to this kind of conversation, whether that is implementing technology, whether that is sourcing technology or investing, even building technology. I look at advising both legal departments and sometimes even law firms. So kind of broadly, that's what I do. Outside of my kind of main focus, which is technology, I also look at more kind of holistic strategic things of legal operations. So things like team structures, operating models, all those kind of things. So I think everything that you kind of think about in the legal operations world is something I've kind of got either a finger or a toe in, predominantly though focusing on legal technology for legal departments, corporates and law firms.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's why when we were kind of putting this theme together, we thought, hey, Alex would be a perfect guest to bring on board. And I think there's a lot to share here and a lot of goodies over the next half an hour or so for us to cover. So what I might do is for our guests here today, we've got a poll prepared for you. And just to get a sense of who's in the room today, and so that we can better kind of cater our conversation, I'm going to be releasing a poll and giving you about 45 seconds. So it's just one question. Quickly go ahead and just give your answer. I'm launching the poll now. Okay, so
I can see some familiar names in the list at the moment. So hello to anyone I've met before. If I haven't met you, please definitely reach out after this. LinkedIn or LinkedIn probably is the best place.
Perfect. That is awesome. And if you are new and you don't know Alex, he is not only working at PWC in their new law department, he also has his own podcast. So you should go check it with the Legal Ops podcast. Yes. Cool. So we're getting the answers in here. We've got a few people who have now voted. So it looks like we predominantly have people from teams who have implemented about one or two legal tech solutions as part of their stack. A few people who have implemented more than that. They're looking to kind of refine it. And a couple of people who are just looking at options. So no one who's just started, everyone's at least kind of thinking about it, and no one's who's really kind of far along the journey. So we've got kind of middle of the pack here today in today's webinar, which is perfect. There'll be a lot to get out of it. So I'm going to end the poll there, and let's get started with today's question, which is how to set up a legal tech stack. And so we thought we might kind of divide the conversation into two parts, one being sort of the problem side of things and one with the solution. So let's start with the problem side first. Look, Alex, the first question that I have for you is how do legal teams, or how should legal teams frame the problem of what technology that they need as part of their legal tech stack?
Yeah, look, great question. And I think it's very tempting to kind of look for the silver bullet in legal technology. Probably everybody on this call has gone to a conference or at least looked online, looked at technology and think, or at least been sold to, everything that this tech solution does solves your problem. But, when you're thinking about kind of technology more broadly, what you really want to understand is kind of your technology ecosystem before you start thinking about specific technology solutions. And what I mean by kind of technology ecosystem is, well, what does your team already use from a technology perspective? Now, look, most teams are probably on Microsoft 365 or they're on, say, the Google Suite. So you want to be thinking about things like, how does the team collaborate? How does the team communicate with each other? Where do they save documents? All those kind of things. Because when you are looking at a point solution or even like a holistic end-to-end solution, you want to be understanding whether or not the tech solution that you're looking at is going to duplicate anything that you already currently have. And the reason why that's important is because the more that you're duplicating, the more that you're looking to perhaps change, and then your change management program becomes a little bit more difficult. But kind of putting the technology ecosystem to side, I think the first thing that every single team should be focusing on really is understanding what I kind of call a process inventory, which is everything that the legal team does from a process perspective. Now, I kind of consider things as processes, but another way of putting it is, what does the team do? And when some examples of that is, for instance, contract review might be a process. Legal intake might be a process. Reviewing marketing may be a process. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to understand across your group, across your legal team, what all the processes are that your team gets involved in. And the reason why you want to do that is so that you can start to understand what bucket that process falls in. And I kind of like to set up the buckets in kind of 4 key areas or key buckets. The first bucket is stop doing. So when we have kind of the overarching theme of do more with less, and you have both internal and external pressures to become more efficient, you'll need to look at all your processes and prioritize where you're going to be able to show the most value. And when you kind of define those processes into these buckets, you should be able to then understand how you're going to service those buckets. Like I said, the first bucket I always focus on is just stop doing. So things that the legal team does that it shouldn't be doing. Now, this is obviously a webinar about technology, so we'll kind of move past that bucket and move into the kind of 2 other buckets which are important. The next bucket is outsource. So for work that you can't stop doing because the legal team needs to still have control over it, and there's somewhat risk involved, and it is maybe somewhat strategic, you would probably look to outsource those. And again, I won't dive into that too much. But then the next bucket really is the do differently bucket. Things that are somewhat strategic, a little bit more strategic, and maybe carry a little bit more risk. And it's something that the legal team want to at least control themselves. And this is the fun bucket, or part of the fun bucket, I should say, because the fun bucket allows you to do things like automate, for instance, which we'll kind of come back to. And then the last bucket is optimize. So when we're thinking about technology, legal technology specifically, what we are focusing on is those 2 buckets. It's the do differently bucket. So that's looking at things like intake triage tools, for instance, document automation tools. And then we have the optimize bucket, which is the other side of the really fun bucket, which is looking at AI contract reviews. It's taking the most valuable pieces of processes that we do and optimizing those. So that's a really long answer to your question, Min, but that's kind of like the areas that I would focus on first, is that the process inventory, and then dividing that process inventory using a prioritization framework that your organization will define to then put in those buckets, the processes that exist within your team.
Yeah, fantastic. And I like how you kind of put it into 4 buckets, and you said the 2 that you want to focus on are the do differently and the optimize. And let's say you're a legal team and you've got these use cases that you want to tackle, and there are just so many, and I'm sure legal teams all around the world and Australia can relate. How do I then go, and you mentioned prioritization, how do I actually go about pragmatically then prioritizing those particular pain points within the legal team?
Yeah, look, it's difficult because some people like to prioritize based on the loudest person in the room, and that's, I think, traditionally how we have decided to focus on different technologies and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, that isn't always the best way of prioritizing things. And the best way I like to think about prioritizing, once you do have those buckets, is obviously understanding the value that service delivers. Now, that's very broad, so let's kind of break that down. If we think about a particular use case, the way I like to break it down is to understand, well, first of all, what is the problem that we're looking to solve? And fall in love with your problem, really understand your problem. And there's a whole range of frameworks out there that allows you to actually define your problem statement. But from your problem statement, you understand what is the benefit of solving this problem, and then who actually benefits from solving that problem, and then how you're going to measure that benefit. You kind of need to go in those layers, because it's very easy to fall in love with a technology solution. And you kind of mentioned in that process, I didn't even mention technology, but it's very easy to kind of fall in love with a technology solution first, and then kind of mold your use case into it, which, I'm not saying that is the wrong way. I'm saying it is a way, but where I've seen success, and I've got about 3 and a bit years worth of experience in implementing a whole range of different technology using this kind of model. You first need to understand your problem, break down that problem to understand what are the benefits, who's actually benefiting, and then how you're going to measure that benefit. And once you've got answers to all of those things, you should be able to then understand, well, which is the tall tree. I think Sepi Harmon taught me that concept. What is the tall tree? What is the biggest problem that is going to give us the biggest win? And look, there's other frameworks out there that you can use to understand, what are your quick wins as well as your kind of longer to implement solutions. And you can kind of plot those. You think of an X and Y axes of effort and output. So something that's going to be a lot more effort generally should give you a lot more output in terms of benefit. So that would sit in your top right-hand corner. Things that are quick to implement, but probably won't give you as much is kind of in the bottom left-hand corner, which are like the quick wins. So there are lots of different ways to prioritize, but I would have a very good mix of your longer term, bigger benefits that will give you biggest bang for buck. And generally what they look like are things like operating systems. So there's lots of systems out there, like a LawView, for instance, which is like an end-to-end legal operations systems that will give you a huge range of benefits, but that is somewhat longer to implement and benefits are higher in comparison to other things. That would sit in your top right. But then in your bottom left, so your quick wins, things like document automation, which the industry's been talking about for a very long time, things like NDAs or any kind of standard settlement agreements or talent release agreements, all those kind of things you can implement quite quickly using a whole range of technology, obviously including checkbox. So that's kind of the, framework in which you can approach it, Min.
I think that's super helpful. I think if there's anyone who's listening, hopefully that kind of puts into perspective how legal teams can start and put the use cases on a map, on a matrix, and within the buckets of do differently and prioritize. You kind of almost like put as pellets along a graph what those use cases are, and as you say, have a mix of quick wins and long-term wins. And thank you for that little subtle plug for checkbox there. That was not prompted. That was not prompted. So thank you for that. And I mentioned here that there is a Q&A button. So if at any point you have questions, please do pop them through. We'll try to answer them. We know that this is obviously a half an hour session. So if we don't get around to answering today, we'll answer it after the webinar and then send it through as an email. So I think that covers well the kind of problem side of things, and where I think people will now, and just based on our crowd, want to know is what type of solutions do I need to be looking for? So the first question, very broad, but what different legal tech solutions or categories, I should say, exist?
Yeah. Look, there are probably a billion different taxonomies out there for defining technology, and there's probably a billion more different ways that you can approach bucketing different technologies. But for me, I take like an overly simplistic approach to categorizing technologies, and that is technologies that allow you to do work differently. So that's kind of that same bucket that I was talking about. So automate, and then there's optimize, and that's kind of very, very, like I said, super simplistic. But when clients come to me talking about the problems that they're looking to solve, what I am thinking about is, does this technology save time by reducing low value work, or does this optimize and reutilize time? So I'll give some examples to that. So one bucket is going to be your automate bucket, which are buckets that are going to realistically remove low value work from the legal team. So those tools, again, look like NDA. So let's say current state, all of NDA agreements are going to the legal department, and let's say they're spending 2,000 hours a year. You introduce a piece of technology that then reduces that 2,000 by 80%, which means you've seen a fairly large reduction in time that the legal team needs to spend on that particular low value piece of work. Now, that is, technology that you want to implement quite early on and stuff that you should be focusing on. But then you have kind of, can you call tech sexy? The sexy tech, which sits at the other end of the spectrum, which optimizes legal teams. So these are things like AI contract review systems. And the reason why I have a differentiation between those two is because it's the level in which the technology is playing. And you think of value on a spectrum, and you think at the end, one end of the spectrum, you have low value to the business. And that low value might be, say, an NDA. I keep using the same NDA example, but it might be an NDA, or it might be a settlement agreement. At the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have very complex M&A transaction deals. For instance, you may have contracts that are on third-party paper. So, more high complex stuff. Now, from a technology investment, where does it make sense to invest? Now, objectively looking at that spectrum, you would say, well, let's invest in optimizing the top end, right? Because if, let's say, with the current capacity we have, we're able to generate 20 complex agreements, again, very oversimplifying this now, and using technology, AI technology that exists on the market right now, we can increase that 20 to 30, for instance, and that would be an optimization. What you could also do is, at the other end of the spectrum, automate as much as you possibly can at the other end, so that you can reutilize that work that has now been reduced or removed by utilizing the technology to remove that low value work, and then reutilize them to go up to the top and then do that optimized work. Now, you haven't optimized, not optimized work, the strategic work. You haven't optimized that work yet, but what you've done is you've reallocated resources to that bucket. So there's two ways you can approach it. If you do it well and introduce technology well and have a great change management program at either ends of the spectrum in terms of technology, you should be able to get a good result. The problem is at the other end, you're going to have a fairly long cycle in terms of implementation, because these AI technology tools, particularly around contract review, does take a little bit of time to set up, customize, and get ready for your business effectively. Whereas if you are using technology to automate really simple things like NDAs and other things that then free up lawyers to do the strategic stuff, you should be able to do that fairly quickly. Getting a solution out there, implemented, and automating 3 or 4 agreements shouldn't take you more than a couple of months.
Yeah, so it kind of comes back to that mix that you were mentioning earlier, right? The kind of quick wins on the low end of the spectrum, or the kind of long plays, the ones that are going to help you do more complex operations like M&As on the high end of that value spectrum. So, quick side question: do you see any kind of trends when it comes to solutions? Common technology that legal tech solutions that most legal teams are probably interested in, or like kind of sussing out at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you don't have any technology, generally where you see the biggest win over a long-term period is probably going to be like a legal operations system. So any kind of system that looks at how you think about demand, workflow management, prioritization, work allocation, those kind of things. Because it's really important to focus on that, because the amount of time that lawyers spend trying to find information, so things like previous advice, knowledge sharing, all those kind of things, is tremendous. If you've got a bigger team, it's just exponential. Got a smaller team, it's still going to be a problem, but just maybe not as large and relative to some of these bigger teams. But solving that problem in terms of knowledge share is probably the place that I would focus on first. It is a slower burn and it is a bigger transformation project. But if you can save realistically 2 hours or 3 hours a week for every lawyer, because they're spending less time trying to find information, or you're saving money because you're not going to the law firms asking for the same advice every 2 or 3 years, that all adds up. So that's kind of where I'm seeing legal teams focus on, is that operating model. Second to that, you will see a lot of teams focus on automating the low value work, because that's the quickest win, right? Every single CLO, and there's lots of surveys out there that basically talk about CLOs focusing on different types of technology. One of them is all around doing more with less and then removing the low value work. So any tech solutions that do allow you to remove low value work, so the workflow automation tools, the document automation tools, I think they're going to be very popular.
Yeah, fantastic. And as you mentioned earlier, there's probably thousands of legal tech vendors out in the world now. It's probably overwhelming for a lot of legal teams to think about, consider different technologies. Where can they find more information about legal tech solutions? Where do they turn to? There really isn't like a unified kind of Google of legal tech, but there seems to be a few different repositories popping up. What would you recommend?
Look, you're right. I mean, depending on who you talk to, some people say there's like 4,000 different technology vendors. Other registers say there's about 1,600, and then others say there's about 2,000. So, I mean, you can take some of that with a grain of salt. And like, what defines a legal technology as well is another question. Like, would you consider Word to be legal technology? Maybe not, but do lawyers use it 90% of their day? Yes. So, there's those kind of questions as well. But in terms of where you can go, there's actually quite a lot of newer sites kind of popping up. Obviously, there's the Stanford Codex, which has been around. I'm not sure exactly how long. I've known for it for about 2.5 years. It doesn't have an extensive list, and it is fairly US heavy. There's a new one called Legal Technology Hub, ran by Nikki Shaver and Chris Ford, who are trying to basically create the Google of legal technology. So you can go to that one-stop shop, understand your use case, look at different technologies. I think they're looking at even adding a review feature as well, so you can see what other people have actually written about that type of technology. So there's that, and I think it is public knowledge. Stevie Ghazi and some of his friends, tech friends, are putting together a register as well. So Alpha Crates, I think he's working with. So there's going to be quite a few. Obviously, just kind of Googling technology as well, that will bring up probably majority of the technology solutions that could be used to solve your problem. But just be wary with that, because obviously the way that Google works is, the ones that have paid more for advertising will kind of fall to the top, and there may not be ones that are suited to your use case. So kind of keep that in mind. The other one is obviously just talk to industry experts, go to conferences, phone a friend. I'm a big believer of, just calling around saying, hey, what technology you used with this. Obviously, you can come to PWC, you can talk to me. I've got my finger on the pulse with different technologies. I have, I think, close to 40 Google alerts now. So I like to try to stay as close as possible to the market on things like M&A transactions or M&A activity, new technology popping up, all those kind of things. So a few different places, actually.
That's awesome. And this kind of comes to my last-ish question here, which was very similar to one that Blair has asked. Now, Blair said that, small boutique firms don't necessarily have a legal ops team, and they're trying to build a legal tech stack, but they're inundated with all this information about different vendors and marketing pictures. I mean, you can imagine someone who's gone to all those different sites and have come up with a list that's, probably larger than the number of requirements that they have. So how do you go through a systematic process to evaluate the different vendors that are available?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Blair. And look, the way that I do it is, again, you need to focus on your problem. You need to understand your problem, understand every single facet of your problem, as in who's benefiting, why they're benefiting, how you're going to measure those benefits, all those kind of things. And what that should allow you to do is effectively create a report card. Now, I think in the example of like a boutique firm, you may not have a procurement team like a legal department would, or a big legal department would. And generally with those procurement teams, they will create a set of requirements, and they would create effectively a report card, which would be key metrics that you would measure every single technology that you're looking at against. You're not going to have that in a boutique firm, so just create one. From your set of requirements, create literally a report card. And I've done this in the past where you have, let's say, the top 5 things you're looking at. So, if I use an example of a legal operations system, I'm looking at file sharing. I'm looking at collaboration. I'm looking at intake, for instance. And then every single time you go into one of these demos, or maybe looking on their website, you're kind of giving it a score of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 or whatever system you want to use. But it's really important to do that, because if you're like me and I go to a billion different demos, every single demo you go to is going to be sick. Every single tech tool you're going to look at is really awesome. And you're going to walk out of that and be like, that's the one I want. And once you see 3, 4, 5, you all of a sudden start to forget about, well, why is this one better than this one? Or, I saw a tool do this really cool thing, but I can't remember which tool it is. Sounds really obvious, but trust me, it's easy to kind of get in with demos, especially when I think the analogy is try to build a plane while you're flying it. So you're so busy, but you're also trying to improve your firm or your legal department. So it's really easy to actually forget about these things, but create a report card. Think about the key metrics that you're going to be, measuring or reporting against, and then kind of having a systematic view after you've looked at all the technology solutions and kind of give them a tally, and then maybe do like a round 2, like a second interview if you want to do it that way.
That sounds good. So you're kind of mentioning, have a report card, an objective standard, invite people who you think will address some of those things, go through the first round. If they don't match it, then out they go. But, from the distilled list, invite them for another round, potentially do a proof of concept or something a bit more intimate where you're kind of hands-on with the product, et cetera. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
the other thing I would mention, especially around technology, is have your get through the door questions set first. Now, the get through the door questions are generally things like technology or information security requirements. So before you start talking to tech and perhaps wasting some time, talk to your IT team or whatever team looks after information security and say, hey, look, we're looking at implementing some technology. What are like the baseline requirements for implementing tech? And from my experience, what I've seen are things like single sign-on. If you don't know what that is, talk to your IT team, they'll tell you what it is. Single sign-on, things like where the actual information is going to be stored. So most of the platforms you're going to be looking at are software as a service or SaaS products. And they're usually going to be housed, or the information is going to be housed in a data center. They may have requirements that it's in Sydney, for instance, or it might be Brisbane, or it might be Melbourne, or they don't care. Think about those key things, because if you don't have those get through the door questions, then you could go through almost the entire process, even do your proof of concept like Min said, go to IT to implement, and they say, hang on, this solution hasn't passed ISO, blah, 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 and therefore we can't use them. So you don't want to waste a lot of time. So get those questions and make sure they're the first questions you always ask, even via email before you even do a demo.
That's awesome. And I like how you're kind of putting it out there so that you don't have to waste time or invest in a relationship that perhaps may not get past those front door questions, as you say.
Yeah, and you don't want to waste the vendor's time as well. It's not just wasting your own time, but you don't want to be stringing them along as well, because a lot of the technology companies are startups, so you do want to think about their time.
True, that's great. That's beautiful. I mean, with this conversation should go for another half an hour, but we've only 2 minutes left. So last two questions, or I guess one question and one answer. Where can people find more about what you're doing, Alex? Where can they get in contact with you? And what's going on that you'd like people to know about?
Look, I mean, LinkedIn's probably the easiest place. I'm somewhat active on LinkedIn. I have a podcast called the Legal Ops Podcast that I co-host with an awesome person called Elliot Lebu, who's the head of legal operations at ANZ. Easiest way is just to go on my channel, my LinkedIn profile, and see all the different things I'm posting about. Otherwise, my email address is literally just alex.rosenrauch@pwc.com. Just hit me up as an email or LinkedIn and we can chat. Always happy to have a coffee. If you're in Brisbane, where I'm located, let's grab a beer or lunch or a coffee, whatever suits.
Fantastic. And last announcement from myself, we do have another webinar running on the 1st of December, run by our chair and co-founder, Paul Venk. It's in the governance, risk and compliance space. So if that's something that interests you, please do come along. We'll be talking about GRC automation. So this is just part of the Checkbox webinar series. And also this webinar is recorded. So we will be posting a link to this to all the attendees, but also you can go and find all our recent webinars and past webinars on our website. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for coming along, and thank you so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure, and as always, such a good time talking about legal tech with you. And we will catch each other very soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, guys. Bye.